So this video is going to look at the law of supply. The law of supply is remarkably similar to the law of demand in a lot of ways, with a couple of key differences. So the law of supply, or supply, is the quantity supplied is the amount of a good that a seller is willing and able to sell. And it's positively related to price, okay? So the idea of positive relation to price is producers are willing to sell more when the price is high and sell less when the price is low. And the law of supply is the claim that, other things being held equal, quantity supplied of a good rises when the price of the good rises. Now, just like demand, supply can have a supply schedule and a supply curve. Okay, a supply schedule is a table that represents the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity of the good supplied. The supply curve is a graph that shows the relationship between the price and the quantity. So a schedule is a table, a curve is a graph. It could be for a market, or it could be for an individual. So this is all very similar to what we've seen in demand. So here we see an individual supply schedule, and as we look, as the price of the good rises, producers' willingness to supply rises. Now, this happens because producers face upward sloping costs, okay? The more of something you produce, generally speaking, the more it's going to cost you to make it. We're going to talk a little bit about this later in class, why supply slopes upward, why prices rise over time, but it's kind of a basic principle. The more you make, the more it costs you, okay? So this is an individual supply schedule. This is an individual supply curve. And if you notice, you lay it out just like a demand curve. The price is on the vertical axis, quantity is on the horizontal axis. The primary difference is, because the law of supply shows a positive relationship, supply is going to slope upward. So an increase in price causes an increase in quantity supplied. And a market supply schedule really shows individual producers' willingness to supply at different prices. So here we have Ben and Jerry. They're both making ice cream cones. At $0, Ben is willing to produce 0, Jerry is willing to produce 0. At $2, Ben is willing to produce 3. Whoops. Jerry is willing to produce 4, giving us a market supply of 7. At $3, Ben is willing to produce 5, Jerry is willing to produce 8, giving us a market supply of 13. And here we have market supply curves. So it's just Ben and Jerry's supply curve added together. Now, just like demand, the supply curve is not static. And there are actually also going to be 5 factors that could shift supply, but they're different factors. So the supply curve shows how much producers are willing to offer, holding everything else constant, right? That's that idea of ceteris paribus. But things do change. The market conditions change, okay? So when these factors change, the supply curve is going to shift. An increase of supply, like demand, is going to be a shift to the right. A decrease is going to be a shift to the left. So in an increase, we see the supply curve shifting from S1 to S2. It's moving to the right. And when it's a decrease, we see it shifting from S1 to S3. And the 5 factors that can shift supply can be remembered by the acronym I-10 squared. I stands for input prices. So the prices for land, labor, and capital that go into producing a good or service, when those prices change, the price of the good or service that's produced from those factors is going to change as well. So for example, if you're making cars, if the price of labor goes up, the price of cars is going to go, or the supply of cars is going to go down. Technology. Technology is kind of unique. Technology, honestly, generally is only going to cause supply to increase. And the reason technology is only going to cause supply to increase is because, generally speaking, producers are only willing to adopt a technology. Okay, so technology is going to cause supply to increase. Producers are only going to be willing to adopt a technology that's going to actually make them more productive. So, unlike other factors, technology really isn't ever going to cause a decrease of supply. If you adopt a new technology, it's not like you're going to be less productive than before. E stands for expectations. The expectations producers are really looking at is future cost, okay, and future price. If producers expect the price to rise in the future, they're going to want to hold off on selling the product right now. So they're going to withhold their supply. At the same time, future cost impacts their willingness to produce as well. So for example, if I'm a producer and I expect my costs to rise in a month, I'm going to want to make as many products as I possibly can right now when I can still produce them at the lower cost. The first N in I-10 squared stands for number of sellers. So this is the same idea as market size and the law of demand. Is the number of sellers increases, the supply of goods and service increases. And the second N is nature and government, kind of natural disasters, government intervention. We're going to look a lot more at government intervention in chapter 6 of the textbook. And again, it can be remembered by the acronym I-10 squared. Now, it's also important for us to remember that just like demand, we have to be conscious of the difference between a change in quantity supplied versus a change of supply. A change of supply is again going to be when the entire supply curve shifts. And this is always going to be caused by these 5 factors: input prices, technology, expectation, number of sellers, and nature and government. A change in quantity supplied is when we move from one point on the curve to another point on the curve. So, for example, this would be a change of supply when the entire curve here is shifting to the right. A change in quantity supplied, by contrast, is going to be if we move from one point on the curve, let's say we go from $2 to $2.50, to another point on the curve. So it's a shift along one curve. So change of supply, the entire curve is moving. Change in quantity supplied is a movement from one point on the curve to another point on the curve.